Welcome back to a special third episode in this particular series with former director of the British intelligence agencies MI5 and MI6. He is also the author of Katya, The Informer, which is the third in a 5-part series. It's an intriguing look inside the world of espionage and money laundering. It's not James Bond, it's not Jane Bond either. It's something else altogether. And we were going to take a look in that because in the first two shows we talked about what it's really like inside of those agencies. And for this book series, David Bickford and his bride, Cary, have created this fictional agency and what happens inside of that. So let's jump into that. Let's start with, you took Cary as your co-author, your bride, and you very beautifully said that she was the best decision in your life. I don't know anybody else who says that except me, so that's really nice. Not about your wife, but about mine. She's definitely the best decision in my life. And I was going to ask you about her, but I didn't realize that you were married before you were in the agency, because I always wonder, like, what the hell's it like to try and hold a family and be out in the field? I can't even imagine that. I'm sure there's a lot of stories in that too. You were married well before that, when you were in the Foreign Office, or was it before that?
It was before that. Yes, we were married when I became a lawyer. In fact, we will be married 60 years in April.
Wow, congratulations. Fantastic for both of you. You have children?
Yeah, 3 sons, 9 grandchildren.
Beautiful. Congratulations. I'm very happy for you. That's wonderful. Grandchildren are light of my life. 6 of them I've got, and it's bliss.
It is bliss, isn't it?
It is. As John Bradshaw said, we should have been grandparents first.
That is so true.
I wrote to my daughter and I said, I know you've seen some of the video on Instagram of me with my granddaughter, and I just want to apologize. And she said, for what? Because I wish I could have been that dad.
Yes, you've hit it. Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, a friend of ours was asked to look after her grandchildren, and she said, oh, it'll be absolutely delightful because I didn't get it so right the first time round.
That's it, right? So you guys have been married for almost 60 years. Does your bride have a background that's similar to yours or something else in that she became your co-author?
No, Cary runs a property company. She's done that ever since we were married.
Right.
She runs the business, keeps me under control.
So how did you make this transition into fiction writing?
Yes.
Let's talk about that story. And then how did you decide that you were going to co-author with your bride?
Well, when I left the agencies, I went to the States for a year, lecturing in a couple of universities in the States, and also in talks with the US government about counter-money laundering, counter-terrorism. And then I spent a number of years with Cary. We were traveling the world around offshore tax havens, discussing countering money laundering and countering terrorism money laundering.
Wow.
And then my granddaughter, who was 12 at the time, asked if I'd go down to her school to talk about intelligence agencies because they had been talking about James Bond in their English lesson. And she had said, oh, well, my granddad was a spy. I got invited to talk.
Yeah, not many kids are going to be able to say that at school.
Absolutely.
There was this, yeah. Okay, dear, sit down.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And she said, well, I'll bring him down to talk to you all. Love my grandchildren.
Are you slipping these kids something because they're coming up with some pretty wild fancies?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anyway, I was talking to the class and I was telling them about the women in the agencies and how brilliant they are and how brilliant they are at analysis and agent running, the rest of it. And it suddenly occurred to me, talking to her, gosh, here's a whole new world. And Cary and I walked away and we chatted to each other and we said, well, what about writing a book about the world of spying? And we thought, well, let's have a woman spy because of my granddaughter. It was sort of natural progression. She was the one who suggested it. Therefore, let's have a woman spy. And we looked at that and thought, well, one of the most interesting periods of time was the time when communism collapsed and we were beginning to get into cooperation with the Russians on all sorts of fronts, which is absolutely fascinating. Probably a period which we probably didn't do enough about, missed, which is a great shame. But that's another topic. And then we thought, well, if we do that, we'll have a Russian spy, because we've been in Berlin for a number of years. We know Russians. We've been dealing with Russians most of our lives. And we thought this would be absolutely fascinating to delve into the life of a woman who grew up during the collapse of communism and whose father was KGB, who was a very nasty piece of work and maltreated her. Her mother, who was a Bolshoi ballet dancer, and left this conflicted woman, Katya, on the one hand being driven by her father into doing intelligence work, on the other hand appreciating the life of luxury and glamour that her mother lived. So she's conflicted.
Yes, which speaks a lot to what we were talking about in the first part of the show, this internal conflict.
The internal conflict going on all the time. Because her mother left the father, she was brought up by the father who wouldn't let her go, and she used to slip out at night into the streets of Moscow, which were then beginning to get into Western music, sellers of knockoff clothes, all the rest of it. So she was living this sort of life, mixing with the mafia on street corners, surviving. And we thought, yes, this is a woman who grew the sort of courage, tenacity, and smarts, if you like, to survive in Moscow at the time that communism was crashing and Russia was trying to find a new way to go. So she gets hired by this new agency that we created, the G8 International Intelligence Agency, which counters terrorism and organized crime.
Mm-hmm. Which two things that people should know go hand in hand, and I think people don't realize that. That terrorism, money laundering, organized crime are very much part of the same sort of batch, and we tend to think of them as separate. Is that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely right. They're absolutely intermingled, and money laundering covers the whole gamut.
Right.
They've got to launder their money somehow. So money laundering is incredibly important as a link between terrorism, organized crime, fraud, all the sort of criminality you can really think of. So the G8 agency, of course, has a Russian director and a UK director, an American director, and others, but we concentrate on those three. Katya, the Russian, obviously has quite a special relationship with the Russian director, not in any sexual way, but he looks after her because he's the father figure. So that's how Katya came about.
So the obvious question is, are you, how do I ask this? Are you able to reveal things in the story of Katya that you couldn't reveal in an interview with Dov Baron?
I know. I'd love to be able to say yes, but then I wouldn't be able to get the books past the set.
Okay, enough said. It's all good.
Absolutely.
Man, sorry about that. But this is also an interesting time for me. You know, you talk about this because I wrote, I think you and I talked about it, that I wrote the emotional source code on Vladimir Putin, who he is and what drives him. And the fall of the Soviet Union is a massive force in his life. And that's this, as Russia is emerging from the Soviet Union to become more, quote, Western, there is this subtext that is also the leftover KGB guys. So the Stasi and KGB, there was a big undercurrent movement of those guys who became often very criminal. Do they sort of enter into that world that you got with Katya? Because that's the politics we're dealing with today. It's like people don't realize that your oligarchs in Russia and in other places, but your oligarchs in Russia and Putin are actually from that world. That's where they went to. They didn't just disappear or become bloody butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers.
No, and that's absolutely right. And The Informer, which is the book that's out at the moment, we're also releasing Arctic Betrayal in February, also deals with oligarchs. Arctic Betrayal, for instance, deals with a Russian Finn who's bought on the black market a Kilo submarine from the Russians who are selling them off at that particular point. And he's using organized crime oligarchs to help him do that. And the big question is, why has he bought this submarine?
Yes.
So that's Arctic Betrayal, which comes out in February. So you're right. It's an absolutely fascinating, dangerous world full of really quite terrifying people.
Yeah. What do you think is the most appealing part of the character, Katya, to the reader? Like I said, this is the third book of 5, right? Obviously, if you've written 3 so far and you got the 4th one coming out in February, people are liking it. So what do you think is the pull of that character?
I think it's her courage, not in the sense of courage as a spy or an intelligence agent, but her courage in dealing with the conflict she had between the legacy of her father and the legacy of her mother. I mean, for instance, in Katya, the first book, the conflict arises in the huge sum of money that she's chasing a money launderer for. And that sum of money equals the glamorous life that her mother led and an escape from the life that she's in as an intelligence agent, which was a direct result of her father's brutality. So there's a massive conflict going on. Big question, does she succumb to temptation or not? That's what Katya's all about.
It's like we talked about earlier, the pull is the dichotomy.
Yes.
That's going on, this dual pull in 2 different directions that one could judge from, depending on which side of the bank you're standing on, as the other side being bad. But that's really a very interesting point of who human beings are, is that we are not single-faceted. We like to think we are. We like to sell that we are, but we're not. Human beings are multifaceted beings who live in a single-faceted reality in that we sell the world. Oh, this is who Dov is. He's blah, blah, blah. And that's not true. That's an aspect of me. It's not who I am.
Yes. So apart from the dreadful situation she gets into and has to fight her way out of, there is this development of her character. For instance, going into The Informer, which is the book that's out at the moment, she is sent to investigate or get alongside a Russian money laundering operation that operates casinos on the one hand, and the money is used to set up trafficking of young girls for prostitution. And she enters that world in the situation where she sees the glamour that her mother represented and the ghastly, awful brutality that her father represented. And there again, there's this massive conflict that's going on as she tries to rescue these girls from the life they're in and bring the organized criminals to book.
Yeah, I really like that you're going into this 2 sides of a personality and these 2 poles. That's really very interesting because temptation is in all of us. We talk about it as the devil and the angel on your shoulder, but we've all got our own reference points for that. What is the one skill that you learned in your career that you made sure she had? Like it was really important that she had?
I call it the end run.
Okay, tell us about that.
That's the ability to bypass a particular problem to reach the solution you want without meeting the problem head on. You go around it. You use people, things to be able to go around that problem to reach the solution you want. And she is expert at that. During her time on the streets in Moscow, dealing with mafia and the sort of people they represented, deception and manipulation became second nature. So manipulation sounds rather nasty, but it can be used as an attribute by an intelligence agent, obviously. But Katya uses it for good. She uses it for survival, uses it for good. And she is dealing with the worst of the worst, and she therefore cannot actually meet them head on. She has got to go around the problem, go around them to reach the conclusion she wants, which is obviously bringing them to book, which is incredibly dangerous, of course. You're right out on a limb all the time doing that.
In part 1, we talked about PTSD. It's really fascinating for me. It's my bias and my illusion, because I'm not in the agencies. But my bias and my illusion is if you've got some compartmentalized trauma that you've learned to compartmentalize in some way, shape, or form, you might be a good person for this world because you can take a piece of you and put it to the side. Now, psychologically, is that the healthiest thing to do? Probably not overall. But in this world of Katya, it seems like that's what she has to do. Is that a common theme?
Yes, absolutely. I call it putting things into square brackets.
Right.
I think one of the abilities of Katya is to be able to put a particular problem that's arisen into square brackets and decide perhaps that that particular problem is not one, or is one that might detract her from her main objective. So she puts it into square brackets on one side. That doesn't mean she forgets it.
No.
But it's there in square brackets to be brought back at any particular time that's necessary to be dealt with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because one of the things we talked about was patriotism, ideology, and all those kinds of things. So what drives Katya?
It's a very, very good question. She's so conflicted, I don't think she really understands what drives her. She wants to win, which is in her psyche. She has obviously a massive problem with her father in the sense that he drove her, brutalized, and she doesn't want to, if you like to put it in the negative, she doesn't want to lose out to a father who thought she wouldn't be able to make it.
Oh. So part of the psyche from an emotional source code is to prove to her dad that she is worthy and valuable without him saying it, but just to be able to see, I became something you thought I could never be.
Yeah, part of that. That's absolutely right. Actually, her father was executed for trying to do a deal with the Chechens when he shouldn't have done. So in a way, he found a bit of redemption for himself, but she's still left in that limbo.
Right.
Cary and I find her an incredibly, well, I suppose we would say it, wouldn't we? Because Cary writes with me, as you know.
Yes.
And we discuss Katya in our early morning walks in the park, in Hyde Park. We go around every morning about 6:30, and we talk about Katya and what she's up to and what her conflicts are. But we do find her a very fascinating character, and she develops book by book.
Do you think that by the end of the 5th book that she will understand her emotional source code?
In Arctic Betrayal, she gets very near it. I can't reveal the plot because it's not coming out until February. But yes, she gets very near it. And I won't tell you the reason why, but there's a very good reason why she does that in Arctic Betrayal. What, in fact, we're doing is we've been asked if we'll do the character of Lev, who is her Russian director, who is sort of her father figure. And we're going to release Lev Christmas next year. So we're going off on a slight tangent to explore Lev as the father figure, but Lev in Berlin in 1979, at the height of the Cold War.
Yes.
When his time as a political advisor before he joined G8. So he was then on the Russian side. So it'll be very, very interesting. But that allows us to develop the final Katya book after we've dealt with Lev, because it'll give us more freedom to make it more understandable about the conclusion we finally reach for Katya.
Beautiful. Like, I've written lots of books, and I know that the book I think I'm writing rarely becomes the book I wrote. When I work on a book, I've got this working title, and then I write the book and I'm like, shit, it didn't actually become about that. That's part of it, but it's not it. There's something else. And I'm not writing fiction, although I have written one fiction book. For you, has this become something more than you thought it would be? Has Katya surprised you?
Yes, absolutely. We were going for one book.
Really?
Yeah, and then we got asked to do more. And she has sort of become such an interesting character. It's crazy, isn't it? One should never fall in love with one's characters. I mean, not the ones in love with Katya, but ones who are in love with the idea of how she's developing. Yeah, and Cary, of course, brings in all the side of it that I wouldn't have a clue about, which is great. So it rounds her off. By writing together, we think that she's a much more rounded but conflicted character, if that makes sense.
It does. It makes perfect sense. And so how did it come about that you decided to co-write with this property person who doesn't come from the world of espionage, who just happens to be the love of your life? Why did you decide that that was the way to go? You could have got other co-authors who were also female, who also maybe had the similar background to you.
Sure. Well, Cary's been part of my life and my business life and my foreign office life and agency life all the way through. She has been part of it. It's been a partnership, more than a marriage in that sense. Business, work, we've done it all together, which is very, very exciting.
Yes.
Well, you know, I mean, if you're doing it out on a limb by yourself, it's nowhere near as exciting and fun as doing it with your wife. It is just such fun, and it makes life exciting and well worth living.
I couldn't agree more.
It was a natural move to write together.
Well, as we're coming to the end of this show and this third bonus part, I want to ask you, when's the TV series or the movie?
Well, it is being discussed at the moment, which is very exciting. I know.
That's fantastic.
I'm not to tell you any more.
No, I'm sure. That's really cool. But if you get a go-ahead, a green light, I want to be on the first to know list. It sounds fascinating. Like I said, I went through the book that I've got, and it was like, wow, this has really got some great twists and turns, and there's a lot of, I thought it was going this way, and it went that way, and it's really intriguing and fascinating, I think, for anybody who is interested in the world of espionage. And I think what's most interesting is the worlds that connect to that world, because we think of it as very separate and compartmentalized, and this is only the stuff that goes on between spies. And then realizing that it's tied into organized crime, and it's tied into money laundering, and it's tied into terrorism, and it's tied into so many things. And I think this is why there's a lot of confusion today when people like the cover-ups, because things are messy.
Yes. And I think we're very lucky because our publishers, Cary, they're in that world and they understand it, and they've let us run free, which has been very, very good of them.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. And is there an American release separate from the British release?
I don't think so at the moment, but I think they're working on that, yes.
Fantastic. Well, you can still get it through Amazon and all the other places anyway, right? So we're going to make sure that people get access to all that. So again, please tell people they can find out more about you, about the book, and about all the resources.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. David Bickford, CB, will reach everything.
Beautiful. And again, we'll make sure that all those links are posted. And I hope you'll stay with us to the end, David. For you, dear listener, remember, those who control the meaning for the tribe control the movement of the tribe. Leaders who are committed to positively shaping the political and business landscape know they've got to tap into what drives human behavior. I'm Dov Baron. I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness the emotional source code to move their tribe, because unified actualized meaning is the single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for individuals and for companies. Remember, we need your help in staying relevant, so please go to wherever it is that you tune into the show from and do us a favor. Rate, review, and share the show with everybody you know. It really matters, and it makes a huge difference to us. So, till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about the world that you're looking at is not quite as one-sided as you think it is, that there are elements going on below the surface, that not everybody is what they appear to be, and not everything is as conspiratorial as you might think it is. And yet everything has more layers to it than you could possibly imagine. This has been a very special episode, and I hope that you've genuinely enjoyed it. Till next time, I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you, tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, in your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.